Your best possession, the rewards of right view, according to the Buddha. Wherever you go, you have to take care to protect yourself. This is especially obvious now with the pandemic, but it's good to have a clear idea of what has to be protected. As the Buddha would say, the most important thing you can protect is your right view, because all the good qualities of the path come from right view, whereas all sorts of danger and all sorts of problems come from wrong view. Your views are like seeds. The kind of view you hold will determine what kind of seed you plant, and what kind of seed you plant, of course, determines what you're going to eat. So plant good seeds. And even if you have to lose everything else, make sure that you maintain your right view. I was asked a while back, which Buddhist teachings are especially useful for giving rise to a sense of peace and harmony, teaching people to live with one another well. And the very first candidate is right view, because it's necessary to have goodwill if we're going to live together. And goodwill is based on right view. Goodwill is a form of mundane right resolve. When the Buddha talks about mundane right view and mundane right resolve grows out of right view. Mundane right view, of course, is about karma and rebirth, teachings that the West has hated for so long. This hatred goes back to the 18th century, when people began to learn about Buddhism and right way began denouncing karma and rebirth as morally abhorrent. That was because they didn't understand them. They felt that karma and rebirth were teachings to justify the status quo. If you were suffering, it was because you deserved to suffer. That's how they interpreted the teachings. But that's not what the Buddha meant by those teachings at all. His vision of karma and rebirth was much larger than that. On the one hand, it's because we do choose our actions, and our actions are under our control, that all the virtues we can think of really are worthwhile. If everything were predetermined, the fact that you were good or bad wouldn't be your responsibility. It'd be something or somebody else's. But you have your choices. You're the one who chooses. So when you choose well, it reflects well on you, and it's going to come back to you in a good way. This teaches you to be very careful in how you treat other people, how you treat yourself. This is why goodwill grows immediately out of right view. When you start thinking about all the different things you've been over the course of time. As the Buddha said, you see people who are really poor. You've been there. You see people who are really rich. You've been there too. No matter what the gender, the race, the position in society, you've been in all these places. And it's not the case you've been a human being all the time either. You've been all kinds of different animals, which means that when you see other people and other animals, they're not strangers. And there's certainly no reason to look down on people who are currently suffering, or to be jealous of people who are currently raised up in society. There's all the more reason to treat one another with sympathy, with a sense of harmony, with a sense that we're all in this together. The teachings also make you reflect on the fact that where you are right now is very precarious. The only things you have to support yourself are your actions. So what kind of actions do you want to create? This is where the Buddha's teaching on the 3 perceptions comes in handy. There's a passage where he talks about developing the perception of inconstancy with regard to all fabrications. And it's interesting. He says the result of maintaining that perception, making it consistent, is that you develop a sense of dismay over praise, gain, and honor. In other words, the things that society holds in high esteem. On the one hand, you see that they're very impermanent, and on the other, you see that there are so many unskillful ways in which people go after these things, harming one another. Think of the Buddha's vision after he gained awakening. He looked at the world and saw everyone on fire with greed, aversion, and delusion, on fire with sensuality. Of course, when we think of beings on fire, it's a vision of hell. Because if you hold in mind the perception of inconstancy, that gain, honor, fame, the things that people go running after because they're on fire, are not really cooling, are not really going to solve their problem. You develop a sense of detachment. You see that the rewards of the world are really not worth running after. Of course, that turns the mind to think about, well, what is permanent? What is constant? What is something you can rely on? That's how the perception is meant to direct your thoughts. The Buddha says that if you try to maintain this perception of inconstancy, but you still find yourself attracted by the baits of the world, you have to keep reminding yourself, you haven't accomplished anything by holding on to the perception. That's what the 3 perceptions are for. They're there to make a difference in your mind, so you learn how to think, to use your powers of imagination as you hold on to the perception of inconstancy, to figure out a way in which you can develop a sense of dismay, a sense of samvega, a sense of detachment from the ways of the world, and maintain your desire to find something that's more solid, the desire that the Buddha says goes with renunciate-based pain. This is the pain that comes with the thought, okay, there is a way out. There is a deathless element. The Buddha guarantees that. Other people have reached it, but I'm not there yet. That's a painful thought. There's work to be done. This is where you bring in the next perception, the perception of stress or suffering in what is inconstant. That's motivation to stick with the path, to take you out of that suffering. As the Buddha says, if you really hold on to this perception, you begin to see the danger of laziness, the danger of discouragement. It's interesting that those two go together. Sometimes we think we have every right to be discouraged if things are not going well, but we can't let ourselves stay there in discouragement. It's a dangerous place to be, because it gets in the way of our efforts, gets in the way of the path, gets in the way of any practice aimed at real happiness. We have to give ourselves encouragement that this is a path that can be done. It may not show its rewards right away, but it has a trajectory that takes us in the right direction. So when you find yourself thinking that it doesn't matter if you take a couple of days off from meditating, or are not so strict with yourself in the practice, you've got to remind yourself, you don't know how many days you have left, but you do know that you have right now, and there's a danger in frittering away your time. And here again, if you don't see the danger of laziness, you haven't used the perception properly, because getting rid of laziness and discouragement is what it's aimed at. Then finally, there's the perception of not self in things that are stressful. There are so many things that we hold on to, our views, our opinions, our ideas about ourselves, that hold us back when we're not willing to let go. You have to see that there's stress in these things, and our sense of ourself. What is it made out of? You look at the raw materials, and there's nothing self about them. They're all things that are beyond our control. They may not be totally beyond our control. If they were totally beyond our control, we wouldn't hang on to them. We can control them to some extent, which is why we make the path, how we can make them the path. But we have to realize that we're using things that are not really ours. That again gives you some encouragement to accelerate your efforts, so that when these things are taken away from you, or when you lose these things, you will have found something in the meantime, that cannot be taken away from you. That's what these perceptions all aim at. They sound negative, inconstancy, stress, not self. But they're aimed at shutting off the ways in which the mind deludes itself about where it's going to find happiness, and they point you in the right direction, to find something that's deathless, free from aging, illness, and death. What the Buddha calls the ultimate happiness, the ultimate ease. That is possible. If it weren't possible, the Buddha wouldn't have bothered with these other perceptions. He'd say, well, make do with what you've got. Make the best of what you can. Muddle your way through, if that's all that there were. But that's not all there is. There is something deathless that can be found right at the human heart, right where your awareness is right now. The reason you don't see it is because you're holding on to other things that get in the way. So you use right view to give yourself the right perspective. And then you use these three perceptions to whittle away the mind's attractions to the baits of the world, its attraction to laziness and discouragement, and its attraction to whatever it identifies as me or mine. When you can cut through these things, that's when you realize that right view really is your best possession, the thing that's most worthy of being protected. So guard it well. It's true that as we go through life we lose a lot of things, and in a lot of cases the things we lose are beyond our power to keep ourselves from losing. But this is something that you can keep yourself from losing. It's within your power to protect it, within your power to keep it. So focus your main protective energies here. Protect your virtue and right view. King Pasenadi is an interesting character. He spends his life living by the sword, and then a Buddha moves in south of town. He develops some conviction in the Buddha and occasionally comes to see him. He'll come to report his insights as he reflects on the life of a king, and one of his insights is that people who protect themselves only with arms, with armies, but don't protect themselves by engaging in skillful behavior, really leave themselves unprotected, whereas those who do engage in skillful behavior, even though they don't have arms and armies, are protected. And the Buddha, of course, affirms that yes, that's right. It's a good principle to keep in mind that when times are difficult, this is when you really have to hold on to the skillful qualities of the mind. The Buddha tends to emphasize two in particular, right view and virtue. He says of the different kinds of loss that you can suffer, there are those like loss of health, loss of wealth, even loss of relatives that aren't serious because you can get them back, even your relatives. Over the course of rebirth, you can get them back again. But if you lose your right view or lose your virtue, it's hard to get them back. In the meantime, you're going to suffer a lot, because loss of health, loss of wealth, or loss of relatives doesn't necessarily send you down to a bad destination, but loss of virtue and loss of right view will, so you've got to protect them at all times. Virtue, of course, is abstaining from harming others. You've got the 5 precepts, the 8, the 10, the 220 Evan. These are different ways of describing what it means to be harmless. And of course, you don't try to get anybody else to break the precepts either. That's an important part of virtue. As for right view, that's more complex. Part of right view, the Buddha says, is goodwill. You start with the principle that you don't want to behave in an unskillful way, and you want to behave in ways that are skillful, to develop skillful behavior. Then you realize that if you have ill will for anybody, it's going to be easy to mistreat them. So you've got to develop goodwill, even in really difficult circumstances. One of the images he gives is of bandits who have pinned you down and they're sawing off your limbs with a 2-handled saw. He says even in a case like that, if you had ill will for the bandits, you would not be following his teachings. You've got to protect your goodwill for them, even at the risk of losing your life. That's the meaning of that image in the sutta we just chanted just now, of the mother protecting her only child. You protect your goodwill, just as a mother would protect her only child with her life. You protect your goodwill with your life. This is an important part of right view, because when there's conflict, the only way conflict is going to be resolved is if you have goodwill for everybody involved. You've got to protect that even when it's difficult, because there are a lot of people out there who are really difficult. But if they can sense any ill will in you, they're not going to trust you. That'll make life harder for everyone, because any resolution of conflict has to be based on trust. As the Buddha pointed out in dealing with the monks, if there's been a split in the Sangha, and one side is operating under corrupt motives, then even attempts to create harmony again that depend on pretending that their motives were not corrupt is not going to be harmony. You have to dig down as to what was the problem. That kind of digging down can be done only when there's a strong sense of goodwill, which is hard, but is the only resolution there is. And goodwill, of course, can lead to suffering. This is where you fall back again on right view, the realization that the suffering that really matters is the suffering you add onto what's happening outside. It's all too easy to say, I'm suffering because of so-and-so. And there's a lot of talk nowadays about how we should expand the Buddha's teachings on the causes of suffering to include social issues outside. But he was very specific. The suffering he was going to cure was the suffering that starts at the real source, craving. Because even if society is perfectly peaceful, people are still going to suffer. And the reason society is not peaceful is because of their craving. So either way, the source is inside. But the good news here is that if you can take care of the source inside, then no matter how bad things get outside, you don't have to suffer. Now, this is not just a matter of saving your own skin, because if you're not suffering, you're much less likely to thrash around and make other people suffer along with you. And think, what kind of world would we have to live in if we wanted to put an end to suffering, and yet suffering was totally caused by things outside? You'd have to be all-powerful. You'd need to change the world to be precisely the way you wanted it. That would be impossible. But the realization that suffering is caused from within means that the end of suffering is something available to everybody, no matter what their social status, no matter what their power or lack of power within the world. In fact, as the Buddha said, the people who go out and try to gain power basically shut themselves off from the way, because they're going to have to harm others and they're not going to want to be open about the harm. They're going to cover it up, and then they start covering other things up too. They don't want to look into what's skillful and what's not. They don't want to hear the Dhamma. They don't want to hear the Vinaya. In that way, the pursuit of power can actually close off the path. So the Buddha's basically saying you have power within you to put an end to suffering if you understand the workings of your own mind. This is why we meditate. You could sit here and follow your thoughts for the hour. That wouldn't accomplish much. But you can also watch the mind as it creates a thought and see the processes. And that's where it gets interesting, because that's where you understand how you process things. And it's how you process things that is causing the suffering. It's like those DVDs of movies where they tack on at the very end a little documentary of how the movie was made. And in many cases, the documentary is more interesting than the actual movie, especially the big blockbusters. You can understand how these things are made and all the technique and all the skill that goes into it. Well, here you're trying to find out the skill, or the skill, with which the mind fools itself. Here we are, creating all these images inside, and then we give them reality. We ignore all the work that goes into creating a thought. We hide it behind curtains. That means there's a huge part of the mind that's a stranger to itself. What we're trying to do when we meditate is to step back and take a stance with the breath, and then look at the mind to see, how do you process things? How do you fabricate things? This is why, when the Buddha gave breath meditation instructions, he talked about bodily fabrication and mental fabrication. Bodily fabrication is the way you breathe. Mental fabrication has to do with the feelings and perceptions, the images you hold in mind. He uses these technical terms like fabrication, sankhara, even when he's talking about something simple like breath or feelings and perceptions, because he wants you to see how these go into creating the illusions in the mind. The gears and wheels behind the illusion are the things causing the suffering. So whether you're dealing with distractions or actually dealing with the concentration object itself, either way, you can start looking at how the mind fabricates around things. You're getting behind the scenes. And it's behind the scenes that the ignorance and craving and the clinging and all those other troublemakers are operating. And it's here that you can clean up the process. You can learn how to fabricate thoughts with knowledge, without craving, without clinging. And that way it becomes a path. You're turning the present moment into a path that leads to something beyond the present moment. So this is the message of right view, that everything you need to know is within your power. Even when things get bad outside and a lot of changes happen that you don't want to have happen, you have to realize that the suffering, at least the suffering you feel and the suffering for which you're responsible, is something you have the power to change. And again, this is not a selfish pursuit. You're not the only one who benefits. The more cool heads there are in the world, the more people with right view and the goodwill that goes with right view, then the more possible it is for there to be reconciliation, a change for the good. So all the important work starts inside. We spend a lot of time looking at the news outside. We tend to forget that the really important news for each of us is the news inside. Where are you giving in to your craving? Where are you giving in to your clinging? Where are you giving in to your anger? Where are you giving in to your pride and conceit? This is the news you should be following, because it's the knowledge you can then take and do something with. There are so many areas that you read about in the news outside where you can't make any change at all. So focus on the areas where you do have the power to make a change for the better. And protect your valuables, these two qualities of virtue and right view. You see them in many lists. There's the list of the teachings that the Buddha gives to new monks, which is a list that applies to everybody who practices. The list describes how you create a good environment for your practice, and observing the precepts and having right view are 2 of the 5 factors in the list. Then there are the 7 treasures, and again, you've got right view both in conviction and in discernment. Virtue comes in together with a sense of shame and a sense of compunction. The Buddha also says that these are the bases for getting the mind into right mindfulness. And of course, from right mindfulness, we go to right concentration. So in various ways, he keeps saying, these are the 2 things that are really important. You're creating the circumstances. You're creating the environment in which you really can get to look into the mind and develop the qualities that you're going to need in order to keep yourself fully protected deep down inside.